We dream of utopias like Star Trek, and we fear dystopias like Blade Runner. But what if the future turned out to be something entirely different? Not even a society, but a nightmare. A world of living metal, decay, and a cosmic horror we were never meant to understand. I have always been drawn to these strange and sometimes outright bizarre worlds, where the environments are so foreign they themselves become the antagonist. So let's take a look at some strange sci-fi worlds, whose scale and strangeness make us feel like we were never even meant to witness them, let alone face them. You can expect some spoilers for the stories I talk about, and with that being said, let's get started. Few artists have captured the nightmares of science fiction quite like H.R. Giger, known best as the creator of the Xenomorph and stuff from Alien. His worlds are dark, biomechanical, and very unsettling, where flesh merges with machinery and the line between organic and artificial breaks down. So let's take a look at some cool creations from the Necronomicon. And of course, I am not talking about the Necronomicon from the Cthulhu mythos that would make us go insane just by looking at it. What I am referring to is Giger's first art book from 1977. The places you see here feel like wombs turned inside out, tunnels lined with organic walls, passageways that look like spines and throats, rooms that feel like you're intruding inside something's body rather than a structure. It feels very claustrophobic. I feel like if you had the misfortune of finding yourself here, you would have to crawl through endless tunnels and tight spaces, some of which might even start moving or touching you. Everything you see in these environments tells you that this is a world designed by something that doesn't use the same logic we do. A space that's both alive and mechanical, where every surface watches, traps, or consumes. I imagine finding myself in these spaces and witnessing all these bizarre mechanics in motion, having to just accept that they're doing their thing, whatever that may be. It even reminds me of that scene from Eraserhead, where we see the machine that turns people into erasers. Just a bizarre contraption. Some have arrows to indicate movement, like this compact person elevator. Then in some cases, there are just walls of hydraulics and flesh where you can't even imagine a direction or purpose. Some of these pieces feel genuinely unsettling. There's a clear sense of something being deeply wrong. Again, I am no art critic, but these things make me think about how much technology has crept into everyday life and invaded our personal spaces. These artworks were made long before we were as reliant on technology and phones as we are today, but looking at them now through that lens, it's hard not to draw that connection. It makes me think about how things have changed since, and where they might be heading. Maybe it is our future as well, that we will become indistinguishable from wires and computers one day. And of course, there is the Xenomorph prototype. And it's interesting how much more it looks like a human here than in the movie version. It kind of lost that aspect in the translation, I guess. There are also images for a Dune movie that never got made, and it, of course, shows a much darker world than any existing Dune movie. There is a tank or fortress that looks like Baron Harkonnen, moving across a grim wasteland of what, to me, look like bodies, naturally. The structure is grotesque, organic curves, bloated, flesh-like surfaces, tubes feeding in and out like veins. There is nothing in these images that you can say for certain isn't alive or going to start moving. You can't hide anywhere because you will probably be used as material for something new. That's what's interesting about these worlds. They aren't just monsters and sets. They're almost like a warning that technology, biology, and reproduction will all become indistinguishable in the future. That's one way to look at it. Another one is that they capture this deep primal fear that our bodies are just temporary materials waiting to be transformed or harvested by a world colder and more efficient than ours. And one of those worlds we wouldn't have without Giger is the video game Scorn. This game feels like you're stepping right into the images I just went over. It really plays less like a traditional game and more like an immersive art exhibit. Everywhere you turn, there are strange devices and mechanisms, and they all have a purpose because you can interact with them. But their purpose isn't always clear at first. In fact, many times it took me quite a while to figure that out. You push buttons and pull levers without fully understanding why, because you haven't pieced it all together yet, and it's pretty satisfying when you do. It's just like those bizarre mechanics from Giger's artwork, but in motion. And right from the start, this is exactly what happens. You click and press a bunch of things, but until you place the man in the chair, nothing will really happen. Even later in the game, some puzzles left me thinking like the job was only half finished, but then it's like, what job? What am I even doing? I just tore apart another person with some incomprehensible torture device. This keeps on happening. You're putting living things in jars, squeezing them out as juice, taking people out as eggs, and things of that nature. So you quickly get used to all the madness. At one point, I stepped into a hallway and suddenly a second pair of hands reached out from inside me and started tearing me open. The first time, it was pretty horrifying and shocking, but it just kept on happening, and eventually I was just like, oh okay, it's the second pair of hands again, coming to rip me apart. The creatures are also pretty interesting in this game, and when I say creatures, it's not really correct. They're more like pieces and fragments of the environment, detached and reattached to the walls and chains of flesh. Most of them are actually not that hostile. You can just stand there for a while and they will ignore you and crawl into some secret hole, going back to whatever their purpose was, just doing their thing. I actually felt kind of bad for them when I was just observing, like, if I wasn't there, they wouldn't have to worry about me and they would just stay unbothered. I kind of ruined their peace. However, some of them will try to get you. And the character you play as seems to be no foreigner here. He knows how to operate everything and how things work. And once I did some digging on the lore, it started to make sense. Scorn takes place in a far future Earth and the city of Polis, where humans have abandoned their bodies to join a purple hive mind, but still operate robotic shells for labor. They created organic slaves called homunculi as living batteries, who later rebelled but fell to internal war. A second slave race, the Moldmen, was grown in factories, and an infection called the Crater Creatures, possibly a bioweapon, spread across the land. In the game, you first play as an infected Polis man who tries to power the Moldman factory, but is overtaken by the infection and becomes a parasite. You then control a second character, born from the Genesis Wall, but are soon attacked and assimilated by your former self. I guess that explains the double set of hands. And I won't spoil the rest. But what I will say is that I see Scorn as a perfect tribute, not just to Giger's art style, but to the whole philosophy. You're not meant to feel comfortable even for a moment, or are you meant to understand everything right away, and you're definitely not meant to win. It's a world built on alien logic, where existence itself is like a burden, and every mechanism is just a means to another bizarre end. You're just another cog in this disgusting, fleshy machine. Blam, I believe that's how you say it, takes place in a world where you're not welcome and never will be again. If the city does notice you, you're a glitch in the system, and it will attempt to get rid of you. There are infinite corridors and spaces that resemble human structures, but they are designed by something inhuman. It's like feeding an AI examples of our architecture so it spits out similar stuff, but without understanding their purpose. So you end up with rooms far too large and just illogical constructions. The whole place is incomprehensibly huge, and it's essentially the final boss of backrooms and liminal spaces. There is no sunlight, no true open space, Only levels upon levels of decayed machinery, automated security systems that kill on sight, and a deep silence. The protagonist wanders this endless machine hell in search of something that may no longer exist. Humans with the right genetic code to interface with the city's controls, or the netsphere. The ancient humans created this, which allowed them to create anything they wanted. But unfortunately, humans lost this access, and those with the genetic code were wiped out. And when this happened, the city stopped recognizing them as its masters. It went rogue on its creators, making a place where nobody really belongs. Which I think is really crazy and not so impossible to be real in the future. Like, we make AI so good that we rely on it for everything, but we forget the password to control it, and we just become aliens in our own world. Yet, despite the hopelessness, there is a grim beauty in Killy's journey. Every encounter feels like a desperate grasp at meaning in a place that has long since discarded it. And he does meet a bunch of interesting characters, which are basically evolved humans. Some got very tall, stretched unnaturally as if the city itself tried to redesign the human form but got it wrong. Others are heavily cybernetic, maybe not by choice, but as a result of constant scavenging and forced adaptation, melding flesh with discarded machine parts just to survive another day in the hostile environment. Most of these beings aren't exactly allies or true enemies. They are survivors shaped by necessity and the indifferent cruelty of their surroundings. Some help Keely and are drawn to his purpose like moths to a flame of hope. Others see him as a threat to their fragile existence, or worse, a pointless anomaly in a world that gave up on purpose long ago. In moments of rare connection, like when he teams up with Sibo or crosses paths with the scattered remnants of human factions, you catch glimpses of what this world might have been. A place of limitless creation, guided by human hands, filled with purpose, a utopia even. But my personal favorite moments from the manga are those when it's just Keely and the empty, endless city. When compared to the previous stuff I mentioned, Blam doesn't feel so alive. In fact, it feels quite dead and lonely. But the city is constantly rebuilding and reconfiguring itself. Maybe for the machines in power, all this construction and reforming makes it feel vibrant and full of life. It's just for humans that it sucks. That's the horror of Blam. Not just the scale and the cold, endless corridors, but the indifference of it. It isn't that the city hates humans, it simply doesn't have a place for them anymore. The world has moved on, and it's doing just fine without us. We're just leftovers, like ghosts, haunting a machine that no longer remembers us. For all the ways the Nostromo from Alien is terrifying, dark, claustrophobic, and filled with death, it's still just a setting for the xenomorph. An originally neutral place overtaken by something monstrous. In Event Horizon, the ship itself is the monster. I've talked about Event Horizon before, specifically as a depiction of hell, how the ship's journey into another dimension turned it into a kind of psychological purgatory. But this time, I want to look at it through a different lens, not just as a vision of hell, but as a pure sci-fi horror story. Because when you strip away all the hellish overtones, what you're left with is a haunted house story in space, where the house itself is hostile. And a fun fact I did not know last time is that there existed once a longer cut of this movie, leaning more into the hell side of things, full of gore and whatnot, but it was destroyed in a Transylvanian salt mine, according to this post I saw online. The Event Horizon was built to push the limits of human exploration, to create a shortcut through space by folding reality itself. By doing so, it went too far. It breached something it was never meant to touch. What came back wasn't just a ship, but a place reprogrammed by whatever lies on the other side. The ship wasn't possessed in a supernatural sense, it's just been somewhere else. A place where suffering and insanity are part of the atmosphere, where the laws of reality exist only to torture anyone who steps inside. It's even cool to imagine that maybe the spaceship crossed into the world of Scorn, and once it came back, it was all messed up, with its logic changed. And you can see this in the ship's design. The gravity drive, the spinning metallic heart at the center of the ship, looks like a machine designed for ritual sacrifice. All sharp edges, dark metal, and ominous symmetry. It's mechanical, but it feels religious, like something built for a Lovecraftian god no sane person would want to meet. The visions the crew experiences are replays. Each crew member sees their own guilt, their own failures, their own worst enemies, as if the event horizon itself has become a mirror held up to their faults. This is why I said it's like a haunted house in space. Every new corner you turn, you see somebody you betrayed before or a friend that you couldn't save. By the end, it's clear that the real terror of the event horizon isn't where the ship went. It's the fact that it came back. And if humanity's future in space means accidentally brushing up against places like that, maybe some doors were meant to stay shut. Thank you very much for watching.